SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, I am Rajesh Sengupta. Our topic is stone, and that is memorials, architectural remnants and objects. Now in this module or in this week we will be talking about stone as a material and how that has different kind of its its manifestation, not only through the time period but also through different kind of purposes, different kind of context and so on. And that is the reason, instead of focusing on a particular era or focusing on a particular region, in this week what we will do is we will look into a diverse range of objects predominantly made of stone. So this is in some ways we can say that the structure of this week is very different, not completely different, but significantly different from the other weeks that we studied. And even though our focus remains on this one particular material, but in itself is a kind of a course, one can imagine that the entire, which can be expanded into an entire course in itself. So what we can see here in terms of that stone, and one can ask this question that why stone? Why stone is chosen as one of these materials here, which will be discussed in this length. So of course that can be said with many different kind of materials. So stone here is not just that this is very this is an exclusive material, that all these things that this diverse range of its use, its significance, and of course that how this has been incorporated in the community lives in the Indian subcontinent is not something that is exclusive, and it's not that like wood or textile or any other kind of things like the metals and stuff, they are not they do not serve the same purpose. So stone here, the entire discussion this week will just be a kind of structure for all of you to explore it further, to see that what all material you can think of which also has this kind of functions such as stone. Now to start with this is also something that I wanted to have in mind, that to when we look into art history, when we look into the history of Indian art, and as I have mentioned that in the first week, in the first lecture as well, that how there are the predominant ways of looking into Indian art are mostly time bound, that we look into the time periods, the temporality, and then of course that how particular regions or particular dynasties are very important as part of the way history is constructed. Now since we are looking into a slightly different mode of perceiving history, and that is through the materials, and that's the reason what I thought will be interesting is to see that how differently a lot of these objects which are related to stone have been part of the culture in the Indian subcontinent for last 3000 years or so. Now another thing is that this is also it's a deliberate way to sort of make the boundary between something that is understood as past and something that is understood as present, to make this boundary slightly blur, so that we can think about a number of stone objects, and not just only stone, but the different kind of objects and how they can also be relevant not only in the history but also in our contemporary lives, to understand the history through contemporary lens. And that is the reason why it is also important for us is to look at a number of the stone tools, different kind of uses of stone, and go back and forth in time. And that is also the reason why I have arranged this material in the way starting with the stone tools and then slowly getting into more and more details about different modes of carving stone and using them. So as you can see that here we have this one, a very simple this stone tool here which looks kind of triangular, and this is a stone tool that comes from Paleolithic time period, and it was found from Nellore near Madras or Chennai. So in the archaeological records it says Madras, and that's the thing that I have also stick to, but as we all know that Madras is today called Chennai. So this was found from Nellore, and if you can see that this is a prehistoric stone tool. So this is not an object in itself. Of course it is an object in itself, but this is a tool which is used for making an object perhaps, or shaping certain things. So what are the characteristics of a tool that we can find here? So there is a of course one can see that this stone tool, this has been shaped in such a way that the surface of it has become almost smooth, and then this curvilinear line that we see, and it's sort of like there is no breakage, there is no abrupt surface. So everything is smoothened in that sense, and then the tip of the stone tool that we find that it's somewhat rounded and it's not sharp, and then at the end here in the bottom, then we see that there is a slight groove that was made here in this particular area, slightly slanted, and that is how one can imagine that perhaps this has been used for someone to hold it in their hand and then make use of it. So since we do not really see sharp edges in this tool, either in this sides or on the top, so one can imagine that this was not used for to cut anything, but perhaps it was used for smoothing things, or to break another surface and things like that. So that way, these are the ways in which we can think about that how the shape of it, the surface texture of it, and then the smoothness, the roughness, and then all the grooves and all the slant in that object, all of them, how they tell a story about its use and its relevance. And so this is one thing one can see, that how in the prehistoric time, and since we are talking about a time that the prehistoric time, and perhaps this comes from Paleolithic period, and at a time when metal, the technologies for incorporating metal in the daily life practices was not really widespread, or perhaps it was not known. So one can imagine for many different kind of things where metal is used for hammering, for breaking things, as well as for cutting and everything else. So stone must have been used, and that is the reason one can see that stone being this heavy mass, and how that can be incorporated for doing the purposes which later on were served by the metal objects. We are continuing our discussion on the stone tools, and we have two prehistoric stone tools on this slide. So here one can see that how differently the stone tools are made, and the first one that we have already discussed in slide 1, and here we can see that is being contrasted with another stone tool. So in the right side of the screen we have a stone tool, a prehistoric stone tool, and that is from Dhon in the Kurnool district of Andhra Pradesh. So which is not very far from the other stone tool from where and that one is found from Nellore, again southern Andhra Pradesh. So this is something that these two areas are in close proximity, and what we can see here is how differently these stone tools are made. So once we do the comparison, the characteristic features and everything, they become much more prominent. So in the stone tool that we have in the right side of the screen, we see this being somewhat abrupt. So it does not really follow a uniform shape like the one that is there in the left side, and then also we can see that there are many of these ups and downs, those are there in the body of this stone tool, and those are still there, very much there. So it's not really, there is not really any conscious effort of smoothing it up like the way we see this in the left side. And also seeing the edges, one can imagine that the way this stone tool in the left side of the screen, the edges have been smoothened very carefully, so that there is no abrupt abrupt edges or anything else, or any abrupt projection or groove within it. So this has been done very carefully, whereas here one can see that the edges, I mean in the right side of the image, we see the edges as all the different ups and downs, and some cases one can see that, I mean, the edges are also sharp. So those things have been kept here, and one can imagine that, I mean, these things were there for a conscious reason, because if a smoothened surface of this stone, I mean the one we have in the left side, that serves a particular kind of purpose, either for like pressing something, or also like, I mean, it might have been used for smoothing another surface, for which reason that needed an even surface of this tool. So if this is the kind of purpose it has served, so the one we have in the right side of the screen must have served a very different kind of purpose. So all these abrupt edges in this and the sharp edges as well, that suggests that, I mean, it must have been used for cutting something or breaking something. So for that reason it required that kind of angular and sharp edges, which is not present in the one in the left side of the screen. And so this is the kind of like, and both of them are portable, they can be held in the hands, right. So if these are the kind of characteristic features that we see in both the stone tools, so that makes us think about how the skill had also developed in the prehistoric time period. And it's not really like one person knew how to do the smoothing and another person did not know how to do the smoothing, but it says something about how the people in the prehistoric times in the Indian subcontinent, and of course we are talking about the southern part of the Indian subcontinent, how they have realized and how they have understood the material characteristics of stone, and how differently a smooth surface and a rough surface can actually serve some different purposes. So those are the things, the understanding of the material, understanding of how that can be used for solving problems, for daily life, for something else. So those things led to this kind of material explorations, those things led to making this kind of tools, and in extension of that making objects. So for all these things one can imagine that this kind of tool making practice, utilization of tools or stone, whatever, those required a high degree of sensibility towards the material themselves, and that is also something that we are also trying to do here, to understand stone from a very from a close proximity, so that one can understand its possibilities, one can see that, I mean, in what all different context one can explore this. So from there I wanted to also show some of the stone tools which are used in 20th century, in the 19th century. So we were looking into the tools which were there in the prehistoric times, and as I have said earlier, that the prehistoric practices or the early historic practices, not all the time that those practices are completely away from what we are doing right now, and these are some of the examples. So for example, here we have this particular stone tool called Nung, and this is a stone tool which is used during pottery making in Manipur in the 20th century. So this is the Nung, this is this tool which is there in the left side of the screen, and one can see this is an oval shaped stone which is again very smooth in its surface and oval, almost like an egg. So this is something that one can imagine that it can be held in hand, and then if it is used during pottery making, then one can imagine that this kind of stones are used for flattening the the surface of the pot, or slowly beating it. Like, I mean, for pottery there are different ways in which the pots and the objects, the utilitarian objects are produced, and in this ones we find that beating of the pots, and also like, I mean, smoothing it, flattening the clay to make it like, I mean, the flat slabs of clay, those are also very much important part of pottery making. So, this kind of tool which does not really have any abrupt edge, and it has a broad surface with which one can beat it on the clay surface, or press it. So, those kind of things one can see that how the stone tools are used for attaining those kind of purposes. So, the basic characteristic, as we have already discussed in the earlier slide, that basic characteristic of this kind of tools which are made of stone. So, that is that the smoothness, the roughness, and then also whether it is angular, whether this is it has a curvilinear edge, or how big this is, what kind of surface it has. So, all these different kind of things one can see that how they tell us about their uses, and some of the things we have seen that how those stone tools were used during the prehistoric times. And this 20th century example from Manipur, this Nung stone, this also says something, that some of the practices of using stone which existed in such a long time back has not been disappeared from the culture. So, there are those continued use of stone tools and stone for this kind of purposes of treating another material, or smoothing it, or making it ready for turning them into some utilitarian object or other objects of daily use. Now, the other example that we have in the same slide, and that is it's a wrestling meal. So, this wrestling meal is a it is something that utilizes the way of the stone. So, the stone being this this heavy material which one can see that how that can be useful for the activities which require high degree of physical involvement. So, wrestling, something like that, where training our physique is very much part of its overall practice. So, their use of this stone as a wrestling meal is something one can imagine that why stone was chosen as the desired object for this serving this particular purpose. So, this is a wrestling meal which is made of sandstone, and it is also found from Andhra Pradesh, and around 1850. So, one can imagine this was made or this was used in the mid 19th century, and and what we see here is this continuous use of stone, and it is also something that this is used for wrestling purpose. This is not used for something that we see on the daily basis. So, for using such kind of tools on the daily purpose, it might not be the most convenient thing because of its heavy weight, but for wrestling a heavyweight object is very much required, and that is the reason perhaps stone serves or stone fits the purpose very well. And here also in terms of its making, one can see that how its circular shape has been made, and then all the surfaces that has been there, that had been it has been smoothened, so that there are no abrupt edges, there are no sharp angles or edges that can hurt anyone who's holding it. And for holding it, perhaps in the middle there is this this circular shape, with the hollow center, with this one this one particular band that is running between these two parts, is something is made in this particular way, so that perhaps one can hold it, or that can be utilized for a grip. So, these are some of the reasons in which we find that how stone is the materiality of the stone is utilized, and depending on its shape, its form, then one can also think about that what all purposes it might have served. So, these are the different ways in which we see that not only during the prehistoric times, that even today, even in the 20th century, and even to some extent we can say today, that how we understand the different kind of uses of stone, and that is how some of the purposes that the prehistoric people have served, one can still relate to that. I am not saying that all these things are directly relatable, but we can think that there are certain kind of resonances one can find in the practices which are there in the history and the practices that we still continue today. So, from there I wanted to touch upon some of the other uses of stone in another part of the country. So, if we can think about some of the objects that we have already looked at, the tools, and then of course this wrestling meal which is an object, right. So, if these are the things we have already looked at, so those are the ones which are portable, and they are usually the ones which are used either for daily purposes or for wrestling and so on, this specialized kind of training. Now, for stone we can also see that, I mean, it's not the only kind of thing that those were used from the very early times. Another use of stone, a very prominent use of stone that we find in the history of the Indian subcontinent, is the use of stone for making burials. And we have touched upon the South Indian burials in the week on the Harappan sites, the Indus Valley sites, and we have spoken about the burial practices. And here are some more examples that how the burial sites, the megalithic burials in the southern India, they have utilized stone in different ways. So, the examples that we have on screen are from Kerala, and there are two different kind of burial sites that we see here. And so, these burial sites we find them from like 1000 BC to 500 BC or to 500 AD. So, between like, I mean, this long time period for around 1500 years or so, between these times we find these burial practices have sustained, and they were carried forward. And that is also something we can see that, I mean, even today in certain Hindu communities in southern India, they still practice burial rituals, and in their death rituals the bodies are not cremated but buried. So, one can see that, I mean, how there are the continuation of this kind of practices. And again, like, I mean, when there is a burial, there needs to be the use of some kind of plaque or some kind of marker which pays homage to the deceased person, and that is how we find that some kind of permanent material is used in this purpose there. And one can think about, like, I mean, what all permanent material we have in our surrounding. And in southern India, we find that, I mean, in a number of these sites the local stones were made use of, and stones are used for their durability, at the same time that, I mean, how they remain almost unchanged over the time, right. So, this is something we find in the left side of the screen. We have something called patikal, and patikal is this particular kind of this burial where we find that there are this pieces of rectangular pieces of stone, and where the upper edge of the stone is smoothened, slightly made into this half circular shaped and in shape. And so, this patikal basically means a hood of a snake. And so, one can imagine that, I mean, the way these stones are arranged, they almost sort of like, I mean, are arranged in a way in which they are providing shelter to the tomb which lies within it. So, this is how one can see that how the shape of it and its resemblance to the natural the elements or like the natural beings that had inspired the terminology of it. So, and as we have already discussed that in this burial site, what happens is that there are burials underground, and then on the top of that there are the stones which are placed in different ways. Like, for example, here we see this particular fashion in which the stones are arranged, that is patikal, in which this snake hood kind of this this ambience that is created. And then we also see that main head like form, like where we have this this long pieces of monolithic stone which are just placed there. There are dolmen like forms, and if you remember that, I mean, we have already looked into some of the forms in the Chengalpattu district of Tamil Nadu, in which we have those huge blocks of stone which are placed on the top of this burial as a sign of showing respect to the deceased ones. So, here we see the local this laterite stone is used for making this particle or the burial stones or this memorial stones. So, laterite is something that we find in abundance in that part of the country, in the Malabar region and in Kerala and in the Western Ghats. So, there is another thing that we can see, that how this porous rock surface of laterite and then this uneven rock surface with this particular distinctive reddish tone that it has. So, all these things add to the regional specificity, and that says something about the site from where the stones are collected and where this particular memorials are erected. So, all these things also add to the distinctive flavor and the distinctive cultural trait of this region. So, and the other thing that we have here, the other example, and this one is called Kudakkal, and Kudakkal is another kind of burial, and again that comes from Kerala, and as I have already mentioned the time period, it will probably be somewhere between 1000 BC to 500 AD. So, between these times there were this widespread practices of making these burials, this memorials. So, here what we have, there is this Kudakkal, which is basically it's an umbrella form. So, what one can see that, I mean, there is this block of stone here, and then on the top of that there is this very carefully placed umbrella like form, and that sort of shows its that sort of is placed here. In one hand it sort of shows reverence towards the deceased one, for as we know that how umbrella is something that is related to the royalty, and or we only put umbrella on the top of the people whom we show respect or reverence. So, that is this particular practice from our daily lives that has been then transformed into the form of stone here, and to make this stone umbrella and then putting it on the top of this on the top of this vertical stone, so that it remains it remains immovable and stable, so that this site where the deceased person is buried should not be disturbed. So, these are some of the ways in which we find that how the weight of the stone, and then of course that the locally available material, all these things, they make a huge deal of impact on the kind of objects and the kind of sites they create, and how their relevance in the society are constructed. Thank you.